It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with Coach. A bunch of you have asked me year after year, Ramsey, who is your favorite professional MMA fighter? And you ever seen that before? Genki Sudo. Genki Sudo. Amazing Japanese fighter. He's been retired for a while, man. You could say he was one of those old school fighters, except back in the old school era, he was absolutely revolutionary. He was doing all those things that everybody was saying, it can't be done, it shouldn't be done. And he was setting the bar higher and higher and higher, and he was a phenomenal entertainer. He was one of the first MMA fighters who really understood how to sell a fight and wow the crowd and make people remember his name, because if nobody remembers your name, nobody cares. It's just a couple of monkeys in the cage doing the man dance, man. But Genki Sudo was different, man. Everything was different about this guy. He competed in mixed martial arts, in kickboxing, K1, even professional wrestling. Japanese professional wrestling, a little bit different than American pro wrestling. A little more, little less working and a little more shooting. If you don't know catch wrestling, that terms, that's a little bit more real competition, a little bit less of the predetermined outcomes in choreography. But fascinating dude. And he had an amazing career over in Japan, and then he came to the U.S. to compete in the UFC. He won his UFC debut. It was awesome. Then he pulled out his flag, as he always did after every one of his fights, with the flags of the world on it, and that message, "We are all one." And he announced his retirement at what seemed to be the peak of his athletic career, where he had so much left to give. And then he became a Zen Buddhist monk, and then he became a pop star, singing, dancing sensation over there in Japan, and he just, I think he went into politics, and there's no stopping the man. What can Genki Sudo not do? I don't know. He's an interesting guy, very inspirational. And anyway, if you like the shirt, go get your own at xmartial.com. They sponsor the channel. And use my code Ramsey10 for 10% off everything, not just t-shirts, but rash guards, spats, training gear, etc. Once again, use my code Ramsey10 at xmartial.com for 10% off everything. Anyway, selfless plug right there for perhaps one of the most selfless fighters who turned down a bunch of money and fame to go and do other things, which consequently resulted in a bunch of money and fame. Anyway, we have a question from MK who says, "Hey coach, are you familiar with John Danaher? He has a very particular way of teaching. Ah yes, the fundamental asymmetry of the human body is such that the triangle choke is disproportionately strong toward the section of the legs as opposed..." He always uses that phrase, the fundamental asymmetry of the human body, when talking about explaining fundamental jiu-jitsu techniques. Anyway, yes, he does have a very particular way, doesn't he? What do you think of him? Can you explain why he is considered one of the best BJJ teachers in the world? Is he doing something revolutionary in the way of teaching martial arts, in your opinion? I like John Danaher a lot. I haven't trained with him directly, but I have watched and studied his instructional videos and his high elbow guillotine instructionals. Ooh, man, those are money. Those are gold. That was game-changing for me, personally. So, does he have great content to offer? Yes, absolutely. Is he a good coach? Yes, absolutely. Is he one of those guys that can resonate with you in unique and interesting ways and help to improve your game by leaps and bounds? Yes, absolutely. Is he one of the best in the world? I don't know. Does he have a proven track record of training successful, highly successful MMA fighters and jiu-jitsu athletes? Yes, he does. And so it would stand to reason to say, well, yes, obviously he's a very good coach and perhaps even one of the best in the world. But let me ask you this. How many jiu-jitsu coaches do you know about outside of maybe your own jiu-jitsu school or some of the others in your hometown? Probably not a whole lot. You probably know of a few celebrity trainers, maybe guys like, well, John Danaher, because he's all over the internet. He's been on Joe Rogan. He's been in the corner of George St. Pierre. He's trained some of the who's who in the world of jiu-jitsu, man. But what about all the other world champions that John Danaher hasn't trained? Who trained them, do you know? Do you know? I would venture to say you probably don't, because jiu-jitsu coaches usually aren't that famous. They usually don't get a lot of airtime and screen time in the public eye. They're usually the guy in a gym telling people, all right, on 3, let's go, boom. And they're working in a gym, not so much in front of a screen. What's different with John Danaher, a couple of things, besides his talent, his teaching ability, and the celebrity status of his students. One, his accent. Yeah, I'm going to go there. His accent. Where's John Danaher from? New Zealand? I don't know, I think. Anyway, he's from one of those places where Americans think, wow, he's got a fancy accent. If you are from an English-speaking country that is not the United States of America, people from the U.S. think you have a fancy accent. My mother's from England. Not the fancy side of England. From northern England, close to Hadrian's Wall, the Scottish border, and I remember the first time I spoke to my granddad. I grew up in the United States. I never met my grandparents in person. I only spoke to them over the phone every year around Christmas time and New Year's. And my granddad would call, and he would say something like, "Oi there, bonny laddie, how you keeping?" And I would be like, what the heck did this man just say to me? And I would go to my mother and say, "Granddad sounds Scottish." And she would say, "Don't you ever say that to a man from Northern England." And because apparently, in Great Britain, the unspoken rule is never compare the way somebody on the south side of Hadrian's Wall speaks compared to somebody on the north side, even though they may be very similar. Oh no, I said it again. Anyway, to Americans, to a lot of them, they all sound like Mary Poppins and chimney sweeps from that movie. Doing the little chimney sweep dance with my arms. And they sound fancy. And John Danaher's from one of these countries where Americans think you sound fancy. And on top of that, the fact that explaining a triangle choke. Let's compare for a moment a John Danaher instructional video on the triangle choke with, say, Keenan Cornelius teaching the triangle choke. Keenan will probably tell you, all right, this is where you put your arms and your legs. Here's how you troubleshoot the submission. This is what might happen if you do this. This is what will happen if you do that. All right, now you know the triangle choke. Whereas with John Danaher, it will start with, due to the fundamental asymmetry of the human body, the lower half will be... And it's endearing. It's endearing, gotta love him, but it's like, can he make an instructional video without talking about the fundamental asymmetry of the human body? I don't know, but it's endearing. So I love John Danaher. He's great, man. He's great. But I'm going to throw out some names. Have you heard of Dan Lukehart? If you train at Brea Jiu-Jitsu in Brea, California, you probably have. And if you haven't, you might not, unless you're a personal friend of his. Now, Dan has trained a lot of highly successful jiu-jitsu athletes. As successful as John Danaher, I'm not sure. I mean, he's trained some guys who won some world championship competitions in various organizations. He's a very good and successful jiu-jitsu coach, but how many of you have heard about him? I'm just throwing that name out there for example. Probably most of you haven't. He does have a YouTube channel. He does put out some content. He does not have a lot of subscribers. Because again, most of you haven't heard about him. Why? Jiu-jitsu coaches, generally speaking, are not that famous. Martial artists on screens. How long have we had that for? That's a fairly recent phenomenon. The first time we had a really prolific martial artist on a screen, one who really grabbed the public's attention, we would call that, let's say it was Bruce Lee. Yeah, was he the best? A lot of people think he was, but I would venture to say no, but he was definitely one of the first who grabbed the public attention, who grabbed our eyeballs and made us look and made him watch him and made us think, wow, that's really cool. He's doing something amazing. I want to learn that. I want to be like Bruce Lee. So, did I just call John Danaher the Bruce Lee of jiu-jitsu coaches? Not exactly, but there are some parallels. See what I'm saying? Does screen time equal talent? Not necessarily. If it did, man, I have how many videos on YouTube? Over 1,400 videos on YouTube. The average YouTuber has way less than that. If it was based on screen time, the amount of time I've appeared on a screen, whoa, I would be super famous by now. But that's not what it's about. That's not why we do this, friends. Why do we do this? So I can practice the art of speaking. And perhaps you can practice the art of listening, and maybe you can get inspired to go and start your own YouTube channel and practice the art of speaking. Now, 11 minutes later, your last question. Is John Danaher doing something revolutionary in the way of teaching martial arts? Well, he certainly was. He certainly was. I'm not sure if we can still say he is, maybe, because he is the sort of guy to think outside of the box and start trying to do the things that other people aren't doing. What he did that was so revolutionary back in the day was emphasizing the leg lock game at a time when it was unpopular to do so, when it was discouraged to do so, when it was kind of taboo. And John Danaher thought to himself, why would you ignore 50% of the human body? And it paid off in dividends. So, what's he doing now that's revolutionary? I don't know. I would have to go train with him and pick his brain to find out. What other part of the human body are we ignoring? Wrist locks. Why would you ignore 1% of the human body?